Hello and welcome, Marta Havryshko.
Yes,
Did I pronounce it right?
yes, correct. Havryshko, yes.
So you are a professor in the I forgot the name of the university. I'm sorry,
It's Clark University.
Clark
Yeah.
University.
It's a Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Strassler Center. It's a wonderful place. It's a very good place to study Holocaust and genocide and to teach as well. One of the best places in North America.
How long have you been teaching at Clark University?
So it's almost 2 years. I'm teaching here the history of anti-Semitism, racism, also the history of Eastern Europe, and sexual violence in different armed conflicts, including Russia-Ukraine war, but also, Rwanda, former Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, Vietnam War, different conflicts. So basically, the main topic of my research is gender-based violence during the war. And I'm writing a book on Holocaust in Ukraine with precise accent on sexual violence and local perpetrators. That's why the knowledge of this topic allowed me to expand my subject, my research subject, and now I published several articles about sexual violence perpetrated by Russian military in Ukraine, precisely in occupied territories. Also, I'm interested in sexual violence against men because we have a lot of male survivors of sexual violence by Russian military, and I'm very interested how this sexual violence is performed, what patterns of this sexual violence, what is topography of this sexual violence, and the consequences. So this is basically my main subject of research. But I'm also study Ukrainian nationalism in the Second World War, and now I'm very interested in Ukrainian nationalists today and how different far-right groups, radical nationalists, influence Ukrainian politics without even having seats in Verkhovna Rada, meaning Ukraine parliament.
Tell me and correct me if I'm wrong, because today I think was the start of huge pogroms in Kiev.
It was
Today,
pogrom
yes.
in Lviv. It was pogrom in Lviv. It was basically the beginning of a Holocaust of local Jews. I am from Lviv, and I know that Ukraine nowadays experience some problems, some challenges, let's say, in commemorating those events. Because, for example, yesterday on 30 June, local authorities in Lviv they celebrated with orchestra, with speeches of historians, politicians, you know, World War II veterans. Of course, they are fake veterans, but still, so activists, different activists, they celebrated the proclamation of Ukraine independence. But what was that proclamation? It was the act that proclaimed Ukraine state. But in reality, in the very document, it was indicated that this state will have a close relations with the said Reich and will basically endorse the new order established by Nazis in Eastern Europe. So I can't understand why Ukrainian authorities nowadays celebrate this, I believe, very shameful act, because the state was basically puppet state. And of course, it was rejected by Germans because they saw Ukraine as a Lebensraum, as a colony, and they arrested the leaders of Ukraine nationalists on the ground. But what was the problem? Back then, many Ukrainian nationalists, radical nationalists, they felt so empowered by this act, by collaboration with Germans, that they felt that they have real power now. And the plan of Germans was to perform this anti-Jewish pogrom, and they call this pogrom as self-cleansing operation by the hands of the locals. That's why Germans instigated anti-Jewish violence. They opened prisons, three main prisons in Lviv, where bodies of political prisoners, massacred bodies of political prisoners shot by NKVD, lied, and they opened those prisons and they made the call. This was done by Jews, by Judeo-Bolsheviks. So you have a free hand to seek revenge. And the main force, a local force behind this wave of pogroms, in Lviv, in Ternopil, in Drohobych, Zolochiv, so basically in Galicia and in Volhynia, in Western Ukraine, like in Baltic states, for example, is the same period, or in Poland. So, but in Ukraine, the main force were Ukrainian nationalists. Back then, they had a very strong anti-Semitic agenda, and they disseminated leaflets. The Jews are enemies of Ukrainian people. That's why many ordinary people, both men and women, joined them in this violence against Jews. And thousands of Jews experienced, both men, women, and even, children, experienced beating, humiliation, murder, sexual violence, robbing, public humiliation, and forced labor, and so on. And different historians, they still discuss the number of victims. And there are more conservative estimations made by Kai Struve, and he claims that approximately several hundred Jews were killed by, but other historians like John Paul Himka and Dieter Pohl, they claim that several thousands could be killed, Jewish people. But it was the official, basically, start of a Holocaust of the local Jews in Ukraine, and Ukrainian nationalists who are now celebrated in Ukraine as a freedom fighters, as national heroes, took part in these pogroms. They were perpetrators. That's why local authorities and memory actors, they avoid even mentioning this pogrom, because it invokes many questions about the responsibility, about the memory, about the national conversation, you know and first of all, about those people who are now celebrated as freedom fighters. I mean, leaders of Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, precisely Stepan Bandera, Roman Shukhevich, Yaroslav Stitsko, and others.
Since you're Ukrainian, maybe you can tell me what is the general, well, how do you say this? What is the general opinion of the population about these events? Not the pogroms, but today's events, which are a clear parallel, I think, to the events of the past. The general population, how does that respond to this? Because I hear that the nationalists, they are of course a tangible force, but they are not the majority of the population. They do not represent the
Yeah,
majority of
many
the Ukrainian
people,
people.
basically, many even experts, when they talk about, Ukraine political landscape, they often refer to the results of the last parliamentary elections, where far right failed to gain even 5%. They gained approximately 2%, and they were united. All far right groups united in order to gain more seats in the parliament. But they failed to do that. Why they failed? Because it was the period when 73% of Ukrainians voted for peace. They voted for Zelensky, Russian-speaking person with Jewish background, comedian without political experience. And they really believe that Zelensky will tackle this, will combat this nationalistic idea promoted by his predecessor Poroshenko. Because Poroshenko, his main claim was Armia Mova Vira, meaning the army, the language, meaning Ukrainian language, yes, promoting Ukrainian language, and the faith. That's why Poroshenko, gained this Thomas and started to establish this Orthodox Church of Ukraine, separated from the Moscow Patriarchate. And this agenda met resistance of, I believe, majority of population. This so-called decommunization, this, crusade against Russian language, it was met with skepticism. Many people didn't want to give up their faith, their language. That's why so many people voted for Zelensky, basically against this ethno-nationalist agenda promoted by far right. But what happened next? When Zelensky understood that the internal force, far right, are very strong, and behind them very powerful political leaders, and they started openly threatening Zelensky, like in Zolotem, it's in Lugansk Oblast, yeah, Biletsky, the Azov movement, they started openly threatening him with violence. They publicly disobeyed Zelensky, despite the fact that he was the commander of chief of those people. He was their superior, but they completely disobeyed and made this very publicly. So Zelensky understood that he should make an alliance with them, some, collaboration with them. And then we have external powers. We have Biden administration. We have Western powers who supported this nationalistic agenda in Ukraine, like it was during Cold War, when CIA, MI6, British Security Service, yes, they supported radical Ukrainian nationalists from Bandera fraction. They knew very well who were those people. They knew very well about their anti-Semitic agenda, racist agenda, about their fascist ideology, about their terrorist activity. They when CIA revealed those documents about their estimations and of Ukrainian nationalists on the ground and those figures, and they are very open. Yeah, they are bastards, they are killers, but they are our bastards. So we will finance them. We will throw them to the territory of Soviet Ukraine in order to gather intelligence, to make some anti-Soviet activity. That's why it's just prolongation of this, long-standing, activity of the West. At some point, that they really, some political powers, some political elites really believe that this entire conflict, Russian-Ukraine conflict, could be used by the Western powers to bleed Russia, to weaken Russia. That's why for them, this entire war and Russian aggression against Ukraine was very instrumental. That's why nowadays, what we observe, that Western powers, many political elites, Western, close the blind eyes on the rise of far right in Ukraine. They send them weapons, they basically support them, and they prohibit mainstream legacy media from criticizing them. On the opposite, we have, some materials in mainstream media where they even make a complimentary remarks about neo-Nazis. And some of them are open neo-Nazis, people from RDK, Nikitin, he is subjected to ban, Schengen wide ban, so he can't enter even the Schengen zone because of his extremist activity. He can visit Great Britain, he can visit US, but in Ukraine he is freedom fighter, and he is openly celebrating Hitler's birthday, openly. Many leaders of Azov, the Third Assault Brigade, they openly express their imperialistic views, their racist views, their elitist views. They do not hide that they want to strip, immigrants from civil rights, but they also want to strip those who do not serve in the army of their rights. They have very strong homophobic agenda, but nobody cares because so many people in Ukraine, they developed such a great fear of Russian occupation because of the Bucha atrocities, because of the so many atrocities that are well documented by perpetrated by Russian military and are well documented by UN and Amnesty International and other organizations. Many Ukrainians develop fear, so they are ready to support those, far right, because for them it's a temporary alliance with them. They portray them as, protectors, as real defenders who are ready to sacrifice their everything that they have and pay the ultimate price, meaning lay their lives for this independent Ukraine. That's why, many Ukrainians prefer not to talk about those problematic issues connected to far right. So they say, we will, at first, we will win the war and then we will handle this problem. But the problem should be handled now. The problem should be faced now because those people, I mean, far right leaders, far right units, they are completely integrated as separate structures in Ukraine armed forces, in National Guard. They have their people in security service of Ukraine. Some far right units are subordinated to military intelligence. So basically, the person who run military intelligence, Gur Budanov, is directly appointed by Zelensky. So basically, those far right, they promote their agenda with the direct support of Zelensky and his inner circle. So when I hear this ridiculous, absurd argument about, Jewish background of Zelensky, that somehow should justify this mantra, there are no Nazis in Ukraine, yes? And people refer to his Jewish background. I want to remind our listeners and those people that Azov movement from the very beginning was financed by Jewish oligarch Kolomoisky. And now Azov is financed partly by Pinchuk, is supported by Jewish oligarch Pinchuk. So we can't claim that the only Jewish origin of some people will prevent them from supporting anti-Semitic agenda, racist agenda, and extreme views. It's not true. Some people have their just political interests and they use far right as a tool to gain political power and to fulfill their political goals.
You have been on the receiving end of the, well, what you call it, the international, the intelligence service of Ukraine. I know your Facebook page just got banned recently, and also you have been receiving death threats. Yes.
Yes, I'm constantly receiving death threats, rape threats, most of those threats. So those people who send me those threats, they are members basically of those far-right groups in Ukraine. And those, Azov movement, for example, the right sector, Svoboda Party. So basically, all sorts of far rights are not happy with my activity. Why? Because I am calling them out. I'm asking them publicly, why do you need to use Nazi symbols like Totenkopf or like Black Sun or like Dearly Vanguard insignia to fight Russians? You have trident, you have Ukraine symbols, national symbols. Why do you use Nazi symbols? You, not Solovyov, not Putin, not Skabeva. You use them and you provide Putin's propaganda, this material about neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Why it's so important for you to use those symbols? During war in Ukraine, during the Second World War and during the Holocaust, at least 8 million people died. 1.5 of them were Ukrainian Jews. Others were ethnic Ukrainians, Russians, and other people who lived in the territory of Ukraine. Why the hell you need those symbols of this criminal regime to use in order to fight Russians? Why? I can't understand this. And the problem is that it's even against the law because after so-called Maidan revolution or revolution of dignity in 2015, Ukraine parliament adopted so-called decommunization laws. And according to these laws, both Soviet regime and Nazi regime were recognized as criminal regimes. And basically, it's outlawed in Ukraine to use those symbols, to display those symbols, because in this way you rehabilitate Nazism. It's a Nazi apology. You basically say that Nazism wasn't so evil, because they collaborated with Ukrainians, that they somehow supported their aspirations, they gave weapons to Ukraine, Ukraine gained military training as a part of Offensive Division Galicia. So the entire, philosophy of those who use those symbols is, very problematic, let's say. And I am very open about this. I don't see the problem, call them out. But they are not happy. That's why they constantly send those threats. And they put me on these mirotvorets. For our listeners, what is mirotvorets? Mirotvorets is a website that was created after the occupation of Crimea by Russia and after the start of the war in Donbass. And basically, it's presented as, as non-governmental, project, but the problem is that according to some experts, this project is directly linked to Ukraine's security service and Ukraine military intelligence. And they put these activists, put on this website the names of different people, journalists, including many Western journalists, Ukrainians, Americans. Donald Trump was there. Tulsi Gabbard was there. Zelensky's wife, Olena Zelenska, was there because they claim that they are traitors of Ukraine people. They are enemies of Ukraine people. But what the problem with this website? So basically, they put a target on your back. And some people, who fanatics basically, who really believe that they are empowered to do something for the mother Ukraine, basically can kill you. And in Ukraine, in the past years, we have numerous political cases of political violence when people were killed. For example, Ukraine professor Irina Farion. Yes, she was extreme right. Yes, she was a very controversial political figure. Yes, she criticized me with, very different, strong words. But I never wish her, harm. And she was killed. She was killed by some far-right activist who really believe that he is making something important for the Ukrainian nation, that he sacrificed himself. But how basically this story developed? Many far-right including commanders from Azov movement, they put very harsh criticism, open criticism, using very open, strong words, slurs. So basically, they instigated violence against her. And this is the new normal in Ukraine, when far-right leaders, because of their status of, celebrity commanders, defenders of Ukraine nation, they can instigate violence against those who are proclaimed as traitors. So basically, every single person who criticized, for example, forced mobilization in Ukraine, or persecution of Russian language in Ukraine, or persecution of the Church of Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, yeah, could be claimed as traitor, could be labeled as traitor. And it's very dangerous, because Ukraine government basically allowed to spread this hate speech and instigate violence against alleged enemies of the people. And I myself, nowadays, I'm a target for many far-right groups and open neo-Nazi groups, including American neo-Nazis who serve in Ukraine, including German neo-Nazis who serve in Ukraine officially, and some of them occupy command position in Ukraine armed forces. So basically, because of those threats, I was contacted by local American Security Service and American State Police because they take those threats seriously. Because in US, like in many other countries, most of terrorist attacks in the past years were perpetrated by far right, especially by those who have some military training. My point is, those people are dangerous because they were socialized in violence, they gain military training, they can gain combat experience, and also they gain military trauma. And of course, they are unhappy of the behavior of the collective West. They really feel that they are betrayed, that they are alone, that Western support is not enough, too slow, too little. And can we should just consider what will happen when the hot phase of the war in Ukraine will stop, and all those far right indoctrinated, heavily indoctrinated with this experience will head home to their respective home countries. They will develop a terrorist network and they will be engaged in criminal, semi-criminal activities. And many countries nowadays raise openly this problem. Czech Republic, Poland, they are considering what to do. Yeah, because they don't want to allow those men with military experience to join their families in their countries because they are afraid of them. And I understand why they're afraid, because other wars, say, when we study different wars, we understand that what trauma is real. And many of those people, especially with very radical views, they will be even more radicalized and they potentially could seek revenge. They will seek scapegoats for what happened to Ukraine, what happened to their comrades in general, and they will seek scapegoats. And who will be those scapegoats? Politicians, immigrants, Jews, gays, and other vulnerable people. They can develop these terrorist activities. So now, those who turn a blind eyes on those far right in Ukraine should now question themselves who they are supporting now, whom they are sending their weapon. I remember when, Azov was subjected to ban in US, in 2018, this ban was put on delivering weapon to Azov movement. Why?
I remember.
Because of their extremist views, extremist ideology, far right ideology, yeah, neo-Nazi ideology, racist ideas. But because of the alleged crimes, war crimes that they perpetrated in Donbass, human rights violation during war in Donbass, but also one of the reasons they trained American neo-Nazis. They trained American neo-Nazis. So FBI and CIA here, they understood that it will be potential threat when all those people will return from Ukraine and will develop terrorist activity in US. So basically now every single government from Western countries who support Ukraine should ask themselves a question. Do we have to deliver weapon to some precise units with some precise ideology? Or maybe we should question this design. Should we deliver weapon to the units who, for example, have a large percentage of people who were mobilized by force, for example? Yeah, so many questions. Yeah, but collective West, let's say, that don't want to put those questions. Why? I call it Euro Orientalism. They don't care basically about human rights in Ukraine. They don't care about democracy in Ukraine. They don't care about Holocaust scholars like me who are threatened by far right. They don't care about this. They care about their own interest. That's why they are so open about the fact that they want this war to continue in order to win time for them to regroup, to rearm, to produce more weapons, and to prepare for the possible war with Ukraine. For this aim, they need Ukraine to continue this war, to continue struggle. What does it mean? Ukraine don't have volunteers anymore. Those people, most of those people, I believe 80% of those people who now enter army, they are kidnapped by draft officers in the streets. They are forced to go to the front line. They are forced to go to the war. They are forced to fight. And West is complicit in this enforcement. Less West is directly complicit because they don't want even to handle this question because they are not interested. Who will fight? Who then will fight? The same reason lays behind why they support neo-Nazis in Ukraine because they are instrumental for them, because they are willing to fight, they are willing to gain this experience. For many far rights, war is the golden period. Who they were, many of them, who they were before the war, football hooligans, who they were, criminals, engaged skinheads, some freaks, some dangerous elements, and now they are freedom fighters. They are celebrated. They have salaries. They have social status. They have benefits. They have media attention. They have awards. They are heroes. That's why, it's a win-win. I mean, for both far rights and political elites that want to continue this war in order to save their countries from direct confrontation with Russia. Because many of them believe that if they prepare well, Russia will not dare to attack those countries. So in order to win this time, they need Ukrainians to fight. That's why they will support even, demons in Ukraine. Just let them fight because Ukrainians really basically are fighting for their interest. Yeah.
Have said
But
so
it
openly.
has nothing to do with freedom and democracy in Ukraine because it's not freedom and democracy. Ukraine is on the way for authoritarian state, and yeah, the situation with human rights in Ukraine is really challenging. Let's say.
How do you see the conflict end?
Uh, It's a very complicated question. When Trump won the election, he positioned himself as a person who will, a president of peace. Yeah. His famous phrase, I will end
And
wars,
this
not
conflict
start
in
wars.
24
Yeah.
hours.
But what we observe in Iran, for example, yeah, what we observe basically direct attack and direct interference in this Israel-Iran war. And what we observe, couple months Trump is trying to negotiate with, both sides. He's putting pressure on, Ukraine to accept all this, this deal. Yes, but conditions put by Putin are very harsh for Ukraine. Yeah, so of course they are not fair. So people who are fed by these, fairy tales about just peace, they are not ready to accept these conditions. Yeah. Many people feel really, I mean, in Ukraine, they feel this injustice because, Ukraine suffered a lot from this war, a lot of destruction, a lot of loss of people. We saw that recently Russia handed to Ukraine more than 6,000 bodies of Ukraine fallen soldiers. Many of them lost their lives during Kursk operation. So basically, and constantly, these, war propaganda instrumentalized this, pain, this remorse and war propaganda. So the main idea of propaganda is, so all those people died for nothing. So what next? We will lose 20 or even more percent of Ukraine territories. But Ukraine, I don't see, and many people in their right mind, and even some military commanders are very open about the fact that Ukraine can't win this war. And Ukraine nowadays can't even retake those, by military force, those territories that were lost in 2022 when Russia developed this, invasion in February. So Ukraine is bleeding, Ukraine is losing people, and I don't see how Ukraine can regain the control over those territories. But at the same time, I can see how West can help Ukraine. Recent polls shows that only 16% of Polish people are ready to send Polish troops to Ukraine. Starmer, the Prime Minister of UK, said that Britain will not send troops to Ukraine because US do not agree to air support. And without this support, those forces will be just eliminated very quickly. So nobody wants to send their troops in Ukraine, but people keep chanting this mantra, Ukraine should win, Ukraine should win. And it sounds like a fairy tale, it sounds like a wishful thinking. But what is the plan? What is the plan? How to win? Ukraine is shrinking. We have at least 200,000 deserters from Ukraine army, and it's only official numbers, and there are unofficial numbers. We saw every single day, we saw, numerous videos of forced mobilization. Many men don't want to go to Ukraine because they're afraid of, those commanders that will send them to suicidal, actions or some PR campaigns. So they don't trust commanders. They don't trust government. They don't trust the Zelensky plan. They don't trust the West because West can betray. And West, in the minds of many people in Ukraine, basically already betrayed Ukraine. You know, that's why who will send their only child or their husband or their, brother to the to death, basically. That's why more and more Ukrainians are questioning the entire cause because they don't see the plan. You know, they don't see how they will, develop this, sufficient plan. Nobody can propose this plan nowadays. That's why, and on the other hand, we see that rhetoric of Kremlin is very aggressive. They want the maximum. Now they are talking about even, the entire Ukraine. Putin is keep talking about, Ukraine is a failed state, Ukraine that should be partitioned and divided, Ukraine as a Russian, little Russian. So basically, he keep denying the agency to Ukraine people and Ukraine nation. So he didn't give up his ultimate goal, basically, and this goal is to destroy Ukraine as a, entity who will that will have this goal, pursue this goal to join this elite club of NATO countries and this elite club of European developed countries. So it was the main reason, one of the main reasons behind this war for Putin. He didn't want Ukraine to join basically this Western sphere of influence. In his mind, Ukraine is a part of Russia. In his mind, Ukraine, the fate of Ukraine will be decided by him, will be decided in Moscow. That's why it's so problematic. And I don't see how he can be stopped, and how I don't see that sanctions just can force him to stop the war. Not sanctions, because we see that, Russia developed so many mechanisms basically to avoid those sanctions. Even Ukraine is still buying basically Russian gas, but through other countries. But it's still Russian gas, and the profit from this gas is still goes to Russia. And many European countries still buy Russian gas, still buy Russian goods, but minerals and so on, materials buy, but through, other countries,
Right. Mm.
And we know that many countries now support Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, you know. So they have powerful allies, and I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic about the end of the war and further developments. You know, I'm constantly checking the map of Ukraine, and those who check this map, and I'm using not I'm using Ukraine military project Deep State, yeah, who recently criticized Ukrainian military command for hiding their failures and for hiding information about new territories kept by retake by Russia. So every single day we see that Russia gain 15, 20, 30 square kilometers every single day. Yes, we don't have these, major campaigns and major gains, but still, Russia is gaining more and more Ukrainian territories. Recently, they gained Shevchenko, which is the center of lithium, the biggest source of lithium in Europe. So basically, Russia nowadays gain a lot of Ukraine minerals and resources. And Ukraine is getting more poor, more exhausted, and more people want to leave Ukraine. We know that many mothers nowadays are trying to take their sons before they turn 18 years old, and or send them, to the West, So basically, they want to save them from the army because nobody knows how many years the war will last. And according to martial law, as we know, men from 18 to 60 are deprived of the right of free movement. So basically, they can take jobs in the West. You know, imagine your plant, for example, was destroyed by a Russian rocket. You lose your job, but you can't go to the West like Ukraine. Many men used to go even before this, before 2022, to Poland, to Czech Republic, to other countries, to Germany, to gain some job and earn money and send to their families. They can't leave Ukraine nowadays. Yes, many students can take opportunities of some fellowships. They can study abroad. So that's why many mothers nowadays, many people are considering how to save their children, especially if there is only child and it's happened to be male son, yeah, how to save them from military service and basically from the war, because it's not just military service in just far from the front line in the safe conditions somewhere in Uzhhorod or Chernivtsi, I mean Western Ukraine, deep Western Ukraine, close to European border. No, many of those who are mobilized by force after 1 month or even couple weeks are sent directly to the front line. Yeah, and some of my relatives were sent in the front line directly, and some of them lost their lives in their first battle because they were not acquainted with all this. They didn't receive the appropriate training. Most of those who are in Ukraine army now are historians, plumbers, archivists, designers. They are not military men. They are not military personnel. It wasn't their dream. It wasn't their career. That's why it's so difficult for Ukraine to reinforce this this military force. But still, as you know, Ukraine is trying to hold on, let's say, and to train new soldiers and to keep fighting.
How is the climate in the U.S.? How is the you are allowed to preach what you're saying, right? You are not censored or you're restricted in any way. This is your position, and you are allowed to say it.
Um, it's actually interesting question. Because we many people know that First Amendment in U.S. it's a sacred thing. Yeah, so the freedom of speech is very important here. And according to this freedom of speech, for example, in Ukraine, yeah, when you display hammer and sickle, yeah, for example, or swastika, you can face punishment up to 5 years in prison. Of course, in the past years, nobody for swastika was put in prison, but for displaying the victory flag, Soviet flag was put on trial, basically. So we have this disparity, very strong disparity. But in Germany, for example, when you display swastika, yeah, and some other Nazi symbols, you can face imprisonment up to 3 years. Here in US, you can organize in Jewish neighborhood neo-Nazi rally with swastika, and it's legal. It's a free speech. It's a protected by First Amendment free speech. But what we observe in recent years, we have an attack on the First Amendment and free speech in US as well. And it's connected to, Israel, Palestine conflict, the situation in the Middle East, and the rise of anti-Semitism. And here in US, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism was adopted, and nowadays is promoted even by governmental institutions and instrumentalized basically to silence free speech to silence those critical voices who are not happy with, developments, for example, in Gaza, who are not happy with casualties, especially among children or women, who are not happy about destruction in Gaza, enormous destruction, about hunger, and so on, so forth. So basically, U.S. also experienced this right turn, let's say, in political discussion, in entire political life, and there is a major crackdown on the freedom of speech. But my speech, when I criticize Ukrainians, Ukraine ethno-nationalistic turn, when I criticize memory politics in Ukraine that celebrate, for example, Nazi collaborators, yes, and at the same time topple, for example, monuments to Red Army soldiers, yeah. Our Ukraine Minister of Defense, in conjunction with Ukraine Institute of National Memory, they made the exhibition of the Ukraine military tradition, about Ukraine army, and about history and present. So guess what? The Red Army is not present in this exhibition. Red Army, where at least 6 million Ukrainians were, is completely absent, like Soviet partisans. But what we had Ukraine insurgent army there, yeah, because they were nationalists, they were freedom fighters, they fought for independent Ukraine. But the entire exhibition is about, how powerful was this army? I mean, UPA, yeah, Ukraine insurgent army. And can you imagine that in this exhibition they indicated that the second national group, ethnic group, presented in UPA were Jews, and it's insane. It's a fake. First of all, it's a fake. But why they are doing this? To justify, to whitewash participation of UPA in the Holocaust and participation of Organization of Ukraine Nationalists in the Holocaust, and nothing about war crimes perpetrated by Ukraine insurgent army. Nothing about dozens of thousands of civilian Polish people, including children, killed in ethnic cleansing perpetrated by this glorious Ukraine insurgent army. And this is current memory politics in Ukraine, based on another national myth about these freedom fighters who are completely whitewashed. And many people, even here, and some of my colleagues who are Holocaust scholars, who are Jewish historians, who study genocide, can't believe even that this is true. They can't believe that Ukraine government openly, openly celebrate Nazi collaborators, openly rename street after Nazi collaborators. Some of them can't even believe that this is true. And they question what I'm saying. But some of them make a conscious choice to turn a blind eyes on this, because for them is the same argument, especially if they are from Eastern Europe, like from Poland or from Baltic republics. They feel so threatened because they are relatives in these countries, and they feel so threatened that they are ready to support any kind of neo-Nazis in Ukraine, any politics that will raise morale, any national myth in Ukraine that will raise morale and mobilize people to continue this senseless war. That's why even here I face also this criticism from some of my colleagues who can't understand why I'm so concerned about neo-Nazis in Ukraine, the rise of neo-Nazis and how they gain political power. I use my social media, and I recommend follow my Twitter, for example, because now my Facebook is disabled, and I believe by interference of Ukraine security service, because they already, They interrogate my friends, they threaten my friends constantly. Yes, so they are trying to intimidate me and other critics of these memory politics. They open criminal cases, they threaten with prison, they threaten with sanctions. We know that Zelensky is imposing constantly sanctions against Ukraine citizens. And this is against the law, against constitution, but he imposes sanctions without court decision, without court ruling, and those people are stripped of their civilian rights, are stripped of their property rights against the constitution. So basically, nowadays those sanctions became a mechanism of Zelensky government to fight free speech in Ukraine and to fight criticism. So when I figured out that last year in August, there was a conference of neo-Nazis in Ukraine in my native city, Lviv, and where heads of major neo-Nazis groups, Ukrainian neo-Nazis like C14, like Azov movement, like, other movement were present. I was trying to find this information in Western media and in Ukraine media. And guess what? Nobody published this information. And can you imagine? And representatives of neo-Nazi Dritte Weg, which is German neo-Nazi most far-right group in Germany, Italian Casa Pound, which is neo-fascist organization, were also present there. Polish Trzecia Droga, Albanian neo-Nazis were also present there. They made pictures, they made videos. They disseminated this in their far-right channels. So you can make it up, you can't. And people blame me, basically, that I'm spreading Russian propaganda when I am talking about this. And I am asking them a question. Can you imagine? I ask actually FBI officers here. Can you imagine that you will organize here in Boston a conference of major neo-Nazis organization with, and some of them, like, there were representatives of RDK, Русский Добровольческий Corpus there, of NDK, German Volunteer Corps, consists of neo-Nazis as well, and they are subjected to military intelligence. So can you imagine that this conference will be held without knowledge and permission from Ukraine Security Service? Really? In war-torn country, where Kremlin propaganda is used as neo-Nazi in Ukraine rhetoric to justify its aggression, you really believe that all those commanders left their position in front lines and just came to Lviv for tourist visit? No. Of course, Ukraine military intelligence security service is using this network between Ukrainian neo-Nazis and European neo-Nazis to co-opt more far-right to Ukraine because of the shortage of manpower. But they are trying to hide this. That's why Western media and Ukraine media are not reporting about this. So if they if this information is absent in the media, in mainstream media, people say it's a fake, it's a Russian propaganda. Of course. So basically, now we should understand that we are in the war, and for the West, it's a proxy war. It's a proxy war. For Ukraine, it could be, considered as a war for independence, of course. Some say it's a war for survival, but I believe existential war, it's only for Ukraine political elite, which is trying to, to gain more political power and to gain more profit from this war. Yeah, because they send their children to Europe, to US, in safe countries, in prestigious universities. They are living their best life. I have students here in US in Massachusetts who are Ukrainians, and they know other students who are children of Ukrainian politicians. So why they send their children to the West while at the same time they are kidnapping children of working class people who don't have money to pay bribe? That's why this bullshit about existential war. For whom it's existential? Only for Ukraine political elites. Only for Zelensky, who now, with alliance with far right, is trying to preserve his political power and to prolong his political life. That's why I don't believe this is, existential war for many people. And we observe that many people are returning to occupied territories because they don't have means for the living. The support from Ukraine government is not sufficient. Ukraine government nowadays has no money even to pay appropriate compensation for the families of fallen soldiers, not to mention other people and other, and we should have in mind keep in mind the information that approximately half of Ukraine budget came from the West, and all these pensions, all these state workers, all these medical workers in state facilities. Ukraine has officially 10.5 million pensioners, and all those pensions are paid nowadays from the Western taxpayers, including my taxes here, included my taxes. So basically, situation in Ukraine nowadays is really difficult, but that's why they are trying, Ukrainian government is trying to develop this war propaganda, like Russian government. Yeah, Russian government as well. They deny war crimes. They deny that, they killed Ukrainian Poles. They deny tortures in detention. But, some testimonies of those people released from Russian captivity, they are horrific. Numerous cases of tortures, of sexual violence, of hunger, of beating. And in during this war propaganda, both sides deny those deeds. Yeah, they want to portray, the picture in this binary. We are good. Yes, we are good guys, and the enemy are bad guys. Yeah, so both propaganda work the same, and we should be very very aware of this propaganda and about this fog of war, and try to seek alternative sources of information, because this war propaganda is very strong. That's why, I often made joke that what Russians, made disappear in Ukraine over one night is COVID and neo-Nazis in Ukraine, because in Ukraine media, those the same outlets who published, photos with soldiers with, Totenkopf patches or other Nazi patches. They say, oh, they are far right, they use this. This is neo-Nazi symbol. No, they are blind. They're completely blind. They say, "Oh, you have such an interesting symbol," and the guy is saying, "Oh, I just like this Norwegian, this is solar symbol, oh, this is religious symbol. It's a solar symbol, and Ukraine journalists, are just buying. They pretend they are buying these, fairy tales. So all played their part, all play this game, patriotic game. And on the one hand, I can partly understand, yes, because many journalists afraid that they will be punished, that they will be stripped of survival means, meaning they will be stripped of their professions, yeah, or they will be persecuted even, or blamed for the treason if they are in Ukraine, and deliver this information to the public. But on the other hand, we can talk about journalism basically in wartime Ukraine. Even Ukrainska Pravda or Hromadske, they became, puppets of the office of presidents. Many of their materials are just, just insane. For example, they openly can promote this, history about Russian language. Oh, it's an enemy language. Guys, millions of Ukrainians, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers are speaking in Russian and their family members. So why not, if you consider those peoples as an enemy people or people who are disloyal to the nation Ukraine, maybe you will open borders for them. Maybe you will demobilize them. Why you force them to the front line if they are so, bad people, who unconscious, you know, it's a, this propaganda is insane. So my message to our audience: keep fighting for truth and keep seeing critically and keep reading different sources, including alternative sources like our program, like your podcast and other podcasts on social media, because these mainstream media or legacy media, they have very strong political agenda, and this agenda is very obvious. When Washington Post is publishing article about Azov's third assault brigade as an elite brigade with successful recruiting campaign, and say nothing, even a word about neo-Nazis there, I think it's very problematic. I think it's very problematic. And we should challenge this because I care about freedom and democracy. I don't want Ukraine to turn into, the Third Reich, but in Vyshyvanka and with Ukraine language. I don't want Ukraine be like this, dictatorship, where, because those who organize campaign, for example, against me, the language they are using, it's is Soviet language, enemy of the state, all this, I read these Soviet documents in my institute, in one of the research institute in Academy of Sciences, how they organize this party in this institute, party um сборы, party meetings, yeah. And for example, oh, this guy, and especially when some person was trying to criticize something, yeah, they use those strong words. Oh, you are enemy. Oh, you are bourgeois nationalist. Oh, you are the same rhetoric, but different, the same rhetoric. Oh, you are agent of Kremlin, you are spreading Russian narratives, proof that I am, and it's such a ridiculous. I'm constantly asking the question, why the traitors and the enemy of the people are not those who are using Nazi symbols, who are wearing Nazi uniforms, and who celebrate in Waffen-SS division and Nazi and other Nazi collaboration formation, but those who expose them, those who denounce them, and those who are saying it's not good, guys. Nazi regime was criminal. The first, victims of T4 operation, this, euthanasia operation, were children, were sick children, mentally ill children, children with disabilities. Don't you know that they killed in Gazenwagen mentally ill children in Ukraine? Nazis. Maybe you want to talk about Kuryukivka and other, places that were completely destroyed with their inhabitants in Ukraine. How dare you even to glorify Nazi regime? How dare you to put uniforms with Nazi eagle? How dare you to establish Nachtigall unit in Ukraine armed forces? There was only one Nachtigall in Ukraine military tradition, and this Nachtigall was formed by Abwehr in 1941 to attack Soviet Union. And this Nachtigall perpetrated anti-Jewish pogroms and killed Jews in Vinnytsia Oblast in 1941. And now in Ukraine armed forces we have Nachtigall unit. And they are open about their name, and they, celebrate Nachtigall that was formed in 1941. So why you are celebrating Nazi collaborators? Why you are giving more facts and more cards to Kremlin propaganda and to Kremlin war rhetoric about Nazis in Ukraine. It's my fault? No. It's the fault of those who promote Nazi ideology, who celebrate Nazi Reich openly in Ukraine. So they should be questioned. No, not me and not those who criticize Nachtigal unit or Vedmedi unit, which uses SS logo, SS bolts, and SS motto, my honor is loyalty, as an official symbol. You should criticize them, not me,
Listen, you
who exposing this.
you mentioned what you call the Eurocentrism, and isn't this what the West is doing now, sponsoring Nazi, I will say, terrorism, extremism? Isn't this like a hallmark of the Eurocentric, let's say, foreign policy? I mean, they have been doing it for years in Afghanistan, in the Mujahideen, and Bin Laden was you actually. He was a freedom fighter. He was a hero, just as you say.
Exactly. So many parallels actually with Afghanistan nowadays. That's why many experts even say that Ukraine is turning into Afghanistan. Because we already have 11 years of war on the territory of Ukraine. So when people say about Afghanization of Ukraine, they mean not only forever war, but also sponsoring, as you mentioned, these very extreme nationalist groups like Taliban was sponsored by and trained by CIA and MI, on the territory during this Afghan war. And we know that, leaders of Taliban were, celebrated and welcomed in the White House, and welcomed as freedom fighters. Why? Because back then they were really instrumental for U.S. to fight Brzezinski. We remember his very famous quote. He said that Afghanistan must turn to Vietnam for Soviet Union. They wanted to harm Soviet Union so much. They wanted to turn this place as a deadliest place for Soviet soldiers, but we know that they failed in many ways. But what they achieved basically, they created ISIS. First of all, they contributed to developing of this ISIS and Islamic, basically, terrorism and all those terrorist groups. So basically, they fed them because they really believe they would be instrumental, but then they turned on them and they started to harm their masters. The same can happen in Ukraine. Nowadays in Ukraine are not only, local domestic neo-Nazis who receive, NATO weapon, NATO training, who are celebrated. Some Azov fighters are celebrated in Pentagon. Yeah, they invited, they're celebrated. At Harvard University, at other universities, freedom fighters tell us about your heroic deeds. But also Russian neo-Nazis. I mean the SAG group, this neo-Nazi group, the SAG. Russian neo-Nazis, some of them are infiltrated in RDK, Russian Volunteer Corps. Some of them are in the Azov Third Assault Brigade, like Uragan and Schulz and other Russian neo-Nazis. Also, we have German neo-Nazis in Ukraine, American neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So basically, Ukraine nowadays, and I must say, like Russian army as well, because Russian army also accept all different extreme groups in their ranks for the same reason, because of the shortage of manpower. Yes. um, but the problem is when, every time when I bring this to the light, people say, oh, look at Russia, it's the same. But I'm not funding those neo-Nazis, Russian neo-Nazis. They are not sponsored by my taxes. like many neo-Nazis in Ukraine, are sponsored by those people who say Ukraine is at the forefront of, fight for freedom and democracy. So you put at this forefront neo-Nazis? Really? Do you really believe it's a great idea to empower neo-Nazis? And they are trained basically by Germany even. It was a scandal recently when six, I believe, or seven Ukrainian soldiers were sent back to Ukraine from Germany because the extremist tattoos, basically hate symbols, were discovered on their bodies. But it was, some small incident because in most cases they give a damn about their symbols. They just provide them training and that's all. And we know that Office of President and these far right brigades like Azov and the Cyril Dassault Brigade, they develop this PR campaign, and they trying to whitewash their image. Yes, and they hire even some, Jewish persons, well-educated persons, promoters, journalists, PR experts, and they are trying to whitewash their image and to present them as, just nationalists, just most devoted nationalists in Ukraine who are ready to sacrifice their lives. That's why this image work very well. And if you question this image, those, politicians say it's a Russian propaganda. You are paid Kremlin asset. That's all. And when you are saying this, you delegitimize this person who is trying to develop some discussion, who is trying to challenge this. That's why I believe it's a very dangerous game for the West. Nowadays, we see that far right on the rise in entire Europe. We see their election successes. And we observe, for example, in Germany, some political elites put so much efforts to basically to put ban on Alternative für Deutschland. But in comparison to Azov movement, they are just, they are just nice guys. Their leaders are, some of their leaders are, lesbians. I can imagine this in a Zoom moment. They are so openly homophobic, especially the Third Assault Brigade and many of the commanders of the Third Assault Brigade. But people in the West, politicians, some politicians, advocates for Ukraine are saying, "Oh, they're such nice guys." They are attacking, people, gay people in Ukraine. They're attacking feminists, but who cares? It's just a, byproduct. They're so, um, so good in fighting. That's why we should support them.
When you mentioned that Nazi groups from all over Europe was meeting in Lviv, I was thinking
Yeah.
maybe this is a next step for like expanding the front of the what do you say to strengthen the extremism in Baltic countries, for example, where they already have Nazi parade, in order for them to be the next in line to take on the Russians. Is that a possibility?
The situation in Baltic states with ethnic Russians is very, let's say, challenging. We recently we hear that some even the Council of Europe, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, had a statement recently about the persecution in Estonia. I believe the Russian-speaking people, and so basically, and this hysteria in Baltic states is very similar to Ukraine hysteria regarding ethnic Russians, regarding Soviet symbols, Red Army veterans, Red Army monuments, and so on, so forth. And we know that Baltic states also have the same struggle as Ukraine. They struggle with local collaborators and the history and memory about local collaboration in the Holocaust and involvement in the Nazi crimes and Nazi crimes against humanity. They have the same problem. And also, like Ukrainians, they have the same problem with commemorating their freedom fighters of Forest Brothers, Лесные братья. Yes, they celebrate them, and they whitewash them, and they hide the information that many of their victims were local civilians, Soviet Party activists, those who belong to Soviet intelligentsia, for example, even kids. And this information is, they are trying to conceal this information. And if you try to, to somehow address this information, you also being blamed for spreading Russian propaganda. So it's the same playbook like in Ukraine. They experience the same challenge. And I believe it's a very dangerous way for the Baltic states because this will be used by Russians, by Kremlin regime, as an excuse why they should attack Baltic states because they will Putin can say, oh, we should protect Russians there, the same logic as it was used regarding Ukrainians, and Ukraine, and this logic, of course, is a very, let's say, it's a very problematic logic, yeah, because those who suffer the most from Russian attacks are Russian speaking people from Donbass, from Kharkiv, from Odessa, from Kryvyi Rih. They are mostly Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Among them, so many ethnic Russians and people from mixed Ukraine-Russian marriages. So Russia are the main genocider, let's say, of Russian-speaking people in Ukraine and ethnic Russians in Ukraine, not Ukraine government, basically. But we know that, Putin's regime will use and still use this rhetoric of protection, let's say, to continue aggression and expansion. What happened in Kiev, for example? Why so many crimes were perpetrated in Irpin, in Bucha? We hear it from survivors in those regions that Russians were very, very furious when they entered some villages, some localities, and they expected that those people will welcome Russian forces as liberators. But many people were not happy to see them. Russians go home. You know, many people resisted, and we saw this resistance even in Kherson, for example. This famous, lady with sunflower seeds. At first, people tried even to organize protest against those soldiers because many people were not happy to welcome soldiers because Russian soldiers meant war, meant destruction, meant kidnapping, meant torture, basically meant war. Everyone knows where soldiers are will be destructions, will be rockets, will be drones, will be, heavy casualties, will be heavy battles, and the first casualties will be among civilians. That's why many people were not welcome. Many my relatives who are ethnic Russians were not welcome, were not happy to see Russians. They made calls to their Russian relatives in Russia and asked them, "What the hell are you doing? Take your boys home. We don't want to liberate us because for many Ukrainians, Russian army liberated those Ukrainians from their peaceful life, from their jobs, from their perspectives, from their life. That's why it's not so easy. And I believe that, this very radical politics, Baltic states, I believe their idea is if they will crack down on this, Russian language, Russian culture, their or Ruski Mir, how they call it, yeah, Russian world, they will protect themselves, they will increase their national security. But I believe it will be the opposite. I believe it will be the opposite, and I have real doubts that the fifth article of NATO will be applied to Baltic states. I can't imagine German soldiers who want to die for Latvian people who celebrate Waffen-SS division every single year, especially if this person is liberal. I can't imagine person who will die for Estonia or for Lithuania. I can't imagine. Maybe I'm too skeptical. Maybe the fifth article will be disseminated. Maybe it will be enforced, but I'm not. I doubt it, especially given the rhetoric of President Trump. Remember the last meeting, NATO meeting in Hague? He was asked actually about this fifth article, and he said, "Oh, there are different, we can differently read this article." So basically, he said, "Okay, if the Baltic states will be attacked, we can enforce the fifth article or not. We'll see." And this rhetoric, this very rhetoric, basically, is the first sign for these countries that they could be left alone, like it was in 1939 when Poland was attacked by Nazi Germany, and Poland had these insurances from UK, from France, that they will protect Poland. But what happened? We saw, and many people in Poland basically they remember this, that Poland was left alone. So I'm not optimistic about the fifth article. That's why I don't believe that even if Ukraine will be integrated for, you know, maybe miracle will happen and Ukraine will be integrated somehow in NATO. I don't believe that, Spain or Portugal, or even Germany will send its troop to Ukraine. I don't believe in that, but we'll see. We'll see.
Marta, what is your solution to the current crisis? If you were like some miracle happened on you and you found yourself in the seat of power in Ukraine, what would you do?
Um, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult question, and some of my responses can be. I believe that security service will listen to us. So, hello, dear officers. I'm not a traitor. I support the integrity of Ukraine. Crimea is Ukraine, Donbass is Ukraine, and all this stuff. I must make the disclaimer because because of this campaign against me. Uh, but many experts. I say what I hear here in US, many experts, they warned Biden administration about these possible developments. That's why we have so many books nowadays that were published recently with the same idea, how the West brought war to Ukraine. The main idea is the West, collective West, is sharing responsibility for this destruction of Ukraine. Why? Because Putin was very clear in 28 when he said no NATO in Ukraine, no Ukraine in NATO. That's why many experts, many political scientists here, and some politicians say that Western countries and NATO should stop this, fairy tale about NATO in Ukraine and Ukraine in NATO. Because what happened from the point of view of Russia from the time when Biden came to power. So militarization started. Yeah, the new weapon was sent to Ukraine, CIA bases were in Ukraine, military training in Ukraine, modern weapon. So basically Putin used the logic that we are threatened. because we believe that Ukraine soldiers will be well trained, well equipped, and will try to retake Crimea or maybe even attack Russian territory. I mean, Russian territory before, recognized
Proper.
after
Hmm.
the dissolution of Soviet Union. So basically, Russia used the same argument as Israel used against Iran. We started preemptive attack because we felt threatened. So the idea is all about national security. We felt threatened, you know, without evidence that Ukraine planned this attack, without, any evidence they supported this agenda, we felt threatened. It was our national interest to protect our people and to protect our nation from the possible attack from Ukraine supported by NATO countries. So the logic of Putin was understandable. From, when you take into consideration, I'm not justifying this invasion was criminal, Russian invasion of Ukraine was criminal, was illegal, and must be punishable. But it wasn't unprovoked and it wasn't unexplained. We understand the motivation of Putin. And many experts said it will be war if you will try to drag Ukraine into NATO or basically bring NATO to Ukraine. And from the point of Russia, it was the bringing NATO to Ukraine because of militarization, because of the training, because of the sending weapons to Ukraine from the NATO countries. That's why, because of this drill, joint drill, NATO and Ukraine. That's why, yeah, from the point of view of Kremlin, it was provoked. Yeah, it was illegal, it was criminal, but it was provoked. So many experts say that Ukraine should have this Austrian security model without any participation in any military blocs. But for Russia, it means basically the division of spheres of influence. So basically, it means Russia want Ukraine to be in Russia's spheres of influence, and it depends heavily on US actually. If US agrees to this, division, yeah, spheres of influence, it will be in this way because many things depends on US because US is the main sponsor of NATO expenses. Up to 70% of NATO expenses lies on US, and US is the main decision maker. So, but what we observe now that the consequences of this clash between Russian Empire and Western Empire, Ukraine became this territory where this clash is happening, and who is paying the ultimate price are Ukrainians. So basically, Ukraine is a buffer zone, is a battlefield turned into blood lands because blood territory because of this battle between West and Western world and the Russian Empire. And even today, Ukraine lost a lot, and many people in Ukraine already want this to stop. They want just to stop the suffering and to stop this forever war that can't be win without direct military intervention from the Western countries.
So, what is your kind of like solution to that? I mean, would you give in to the Russians' terms?
I'm happy that I'm not in power in Ukraine because it's very
I see.
difficult solution. It's very
Yeah.
difficult solution. The constitution of Ukraine, of course, says that Crimea is Ukraine, Donbass in Ukraine, everything is Ukraine. But the reality is very different, and the situation in the battlefield is very different. That's why I believe. Yeah, Ukraine political power, political elites are in very complicated situation. But and I don't see the willingness from the Western countries to push. Even towers are not, at least officially, sent to Ukraine. So I don't see this willingness in the West to support Ukraine sufficiently. This support is not enough to win this war or to somehow make the turning point, in the battlefield. Um, so I have no receipt. I have no receipt. Many actors here, and Ukraine people are strong. Ukraine people are resilient, but I believe they were not the main decision makers um, at the end. The bottom line, it will be the solution will be between, I believe, US and Russia, between those superpowers that will decide the fate of this little, in comparison to them, little country, and this devastated country.
It's a horrible tragedy what has happened.
Yeah, it's
Have you?
strategy. Yeah.
It is a tragedy. Have you seen the great late Stephen Cohen, the Russian professor, American Russian professor? He was an expert in Russia studies.
Yeah, I
He,
know him.
yeah,
Yeah.
he died unfortunately, I guess, before the war started. But he warned about this in decades prior to the conflict started. A great man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So this conflict, it didn't started in 2022. It didn't started even in 2014. Of course, the direct aggression started in 2014 from annexation of Crimea. But the entire, situation, entire relations between Ukraine and Russia, where, we remember this complicated history, and yeah, so we still have this, Russian imperialist thinking, in the Kremlin, and Ukraine often was, this battleground for different forces, from the Western powers who want to use Ukraine as a, as a tool to bleed Russia, to weaken Russia, to destroy Russia, or how they call to decolonize Russia. It's another it's another modern word how to basically destroy Russia, decolonize. Yeah, so basically, to that's why they're talking about Chechnya, but many people say, and even members of Russian opposition, we see those voices that many afraid the solution of Russia, yeah, Russian Federation, because the hell can be, start can start, many wars, many conflicts, and Chechnya will be not only a region, that could be very hot and very bloody. That's why I believe that, and from the point of view, I believe, of some, people in power in US nowadays, they are aware of this danger, you know, that this solution of Russia may bring more problems than profits to the West. That's why some people prefer not to feed these separatist, ideas in different regions in Russian Federation, because they're afraid that it will be catastrophe. It will be disaster, and it will be, war of, you know, numerous civil wars, let's say. We'll
Just
see.
for I'm just for curiosity, I was I can ask you. I don't know if you are aware of it, or if you're any way capable of answering. But does Russia operate in like the U.S. does? Like I mean, like sponsor separatist movements across the United States, for example. I don't see that happening, but maybe I'm just not aware of it.
Um, I'm not sure about this, but you are right. The problem is, for example, when we take Russian, Российский добровольческий корпус, Русский добровольческий корпус, yes, RDK, Russian Volunteer Corps, they're openly saying that their aim is the solution of Russia, or they call it decolonization of Russia. And Nikitin, who is the leader of them, is openly saying, "Oh, my dream is to enter Kremlin on, German tank." Yeah, for him it will be, very, symbolic. So, and they are well armed, and they are taking they are taking recruits from prisoners of wars, Russian prisoners of wars, former Wagner, for example, members, or some, former prisoners, I mean criminal prisoners, for example, who fought in different Russian units. And nowadays they are getting more and more manpower. And even recently Putin mentioned them. So basically the West is sponsoring, because all their weapon is the Western weapon, basically. Yes, some of their weapon is Ukrainian weapon, yeah. But for example, Deutsche Welle and other Western media, mainstream media, they publish materials about RDK and Nikitin's, freedom fighter, all these good Russians, that they just, want to decolonize Russia. And so I understand Russians who are not happy with this, because Western countries basically are financing, sponsoring, and supporting those who claim that their aim is to destroy Russia. I can imagine this happening here in Canada, for example, or here in Mexico, or in other neighboring countries. I mean, neighbors to US. I can see this happening. Those countries will be bombed. They will be just attacked by US, I believe, because nobody will allow close to your borders, these militia, armed to the teeth with such a radical agenda to destroy, to destroy the country, to topple down the government, so so from the point of view of, Putin, it's understandable. Yeah, you have near your borders these, hundreds, or who knows how many of them, of well trained, armed to the teeth, people who already entered Bryansk, Kursk, who made these PR, interventions, who recorded video in order to humiliate Russia, to humiliate Putin himself, and say, you're not so powerful, you can't protect your borders. So I understand why Putin is furious. And we should take into consideration the type of Putin. He has very, he has this, toxic masculinity type, macho man, and he's very aggressive, and he want to achieve his goals, and he don't like to be humiliated. He just don't like to be humiliated. That's why I believe that use he will use every possible sources to destroy this group, Russian Volunteer Corps, and other groups that he or buy them, or just buy them, because many Russian neo-Nazis, they infiltrated actually Azov movement and Azov units. So, they share so many Russian neo-Nazis and Ukrainian neo-Nazis, share so many same ideas. For example, anti-Muslim sentiments, anti-Arab sentiments, white supremacy. They are disturbed about this fate of, white Europe. They also have this cult of leader, strong leader, vozhd. They also they are talking about they also very homophobic. They both Russian neo-Nazis and Ukrainian neo-Nazis both are anti-Semitic, but at the same time, many of them support State of Israel. But at the same time, many of them support the State of Israel because for them it's it's just example of this ethnic, religious state, violent state, militarized state, very powerful state, and. But they share so many ideas, and this homophobia, for example, they reject this, decadence in the West. This, that made, according to their views, that made Western men weak. Yeah, that they have this sentiment about strong man, physically fit man who is violent, who is in the military. They both share the same ideas, both. That's why Putin can easily basically buy Azov movement, especially taking into consideration that many Azov members, they are from eastern and central Ukraine and South Ukraine. Basically, many of them are ethnic Russians or half ethnic Russians or have some ethnic Russians in their family. Many of them are Russian speaking people, in contrast to these Banderis from Western Ukraine. That's why I believe they can easily find a solution. And I believe we should keep in mind the possibility that Putin can make a deal with Ukrainian Nazis, and then they together will go further to the west. We
Interesting.
should keep in mind this possibility. It's another possibility.
And you mentioned the similarities between the two extremist groups. It's actually interesting because most extremists groups in the world, I think, are male dominated. They have
Yes,
more or less
exactly.
the same values, like like the traditional male role. They have like the watched, as you said, like the chieftain. They need like a strong tribal appeal. Even
Yeah.
you said they had links to Israel, or like they supported Israel. Israeli nationalism are just the same. The guy who killed the priest in the U.S. I think, yeah, with the
Yeah.
tattoos on the he is a Nazi. I mean, he's a Nazi. He's a
Yeah.
Jewish, but
Yeah.
like it's only like the facade, the cosmetics you can change, and like the idealism is really like the embodiment of the Nazism. So that you could write a paper about that. I think like a scientific paper. Um, but do you think Russia would be, like you said about Putin, his character, his profile, but how would Russia be without Putin? Like, do you think it would be? I mean,
Uh,
who would step in?
yes, I understand what do you mean. Russia don't have sustainable and long democratic tradition, let's say. Yeah, because it was sometime in 1990s, and many, and we know that many USA grants were sent to Russia to develop this, democratic societies and so on, so forth. But the problem is that, yeah, Russian society um, is used to this model, I believe. And when people say that Putin has not such a great support in Russia, I doubt this claim. I really doubt this claim because even among some of my distant relatives or some of my acquaintance in Russia, and they are people of my age, meaning they are in the 40s or 30s, and they support Putin. They really believe that he is the savior of Russia because they buy this idea, and West basically is proving this idea, yeah, that we we hear this rhetoric, that Russia must be decolonized, yeah. So basically, it's the destruction of Russia, and many people don't want this, yeah. They want preserve this entity, those territories, and for many Russians, it's just unacceptable. Even if they, hate Putin, it's unacceptable. That's why Putin nowadays, even those we observe this transformation. For example, Latinina. Yeah, now she's so criticized, so people are so many people are critical about her position because they really believe that she at the beginning of the Putin's invasion of Ukraine, she was very critical of this. She was very, she supported Ukraine, but now she changed her position, and now she really started, to portray the West and Ukraine as a threat, security threat to Russia as a nation, to Russians as a people. Yeah, because of different, terrorist attacks, yeah, that are happening in the territories of in the territory of Russia. These, for example, this terrorist attack organized in Bryansk train, you know so it was poor terrorist attack, and civilians were killed. And every time when this have things like this happening, many people question the entire logic of war. And I believe nowadays many Russians believe that Russia is threatened by the West, and Ukraine is a tool, Western tool, and Ukraine radicals are Western tools for destruction of Russia. That's why they are ready to support Putin. That's why we have so many volunteers in the Russian army, not only because of the payment, because of the social benefits, but I believe ideological reasons and ideological motivation, political motivation also plays some role here. We should acknowledge that there are people in Ukraine. It was very funny. In Ukraine, we have one oppositional leader, Russian oppositional leader, former neo-Nazi. He identified himself as former neo-Nazi,
The
Mishi
old guy?
Areshnikov. Mishi Areshnikov from Chuvashia. And he was talking about, yeah, we are organizing this, resistance in Chuvashia. And, and this video was put on YouTube, and I started to list comments, and people from Chuvashia started to ask his sanity because they asked him, how will Chuvashia basically survive without resources, without everything? Do you know basically the will of local people? Real will, how we will survive without these, benefits from the state, from the federation. Where do you see this resistance? Where this imagined, resistance? And it was very funny to read all those comments, but they pretend, we are organizing, people there, we have this underground resistance movement, national liberation movement. But I doubt that many of those, subjects of Russian Federation, these, regions, poor regions, without resources, without, I doubt that they basically want to obtain their, to be independent. Maybe some people, Chechnya is more complicated, yeah, because there is, sentiments. Many people are not happy with this dictatorship by, by Kadyrov, and about these Sharia laws and about this kidnapping and crime. So basically, they are not happy with this criminal regime installed by Kadyrov. Many are not happy. I remember I was moving from one place to another in Basel, and my truck driver was Chechen guy. And when he learned that I'm from Ukraine, he said, "Oh, I'm supporting Ukraine resistance movement, because during Chechen wars, those fucking Russians, they killed my two of my brothers, and they raped my sister. So we are waiting for the start of uprising." And I was like, interesting. So basically, there are still people in Chechnya, I believe, who want to be independent, who want from Russia, but we don't know, because of these, we can't understand how strong are those sentiments. Yeah, but Ukrainian security service, they are trying to feed these, of course, trying to feed in the territory of Russia these separatist sentiments. Of course, I believe, they really believe it's very beneficial because Russia will be weak. Yeah, Russian government will be, and political elites will be preoccupied with fighting internal threats, with fighting the separatist movement. Of course, it was promoted also by Ukrainian nationalists in the ground during the Second World War. And after the Second World War, they made this slogan, they organized an anti-Bolshevik, uh, entity, and they all constantly talked about this, anti-Soviet resistance, decolonization, and so on and so forth. But the bottom line was the solution of Russia, weakening Russia, for Western countries and for the collective West. Why it's needed? Because they want Russian resources, of course. It's obvious, but is it beneficial for Ukraine? I'm not sure, because I'm not sure that it's very good to have numerous armored groups along with Ukraine borders who will fight with each other, and to have this, destabilized region with, narco trafficking, weapon trafficking, human trafficking. That's why I'm not sure is it will be a good solution. But what Russians want, we should listen, of course, to Russians. I understand that it's not easy to understand the public opinion in Russia with this level of censorship. But still, I believe that many people support Putin, still support, because many of them feel threatened, and by the West,
for the
by the
right
West.
reasons. But
Yeah.
I want to first of all thank you for your time. It was a true pleasure. But before I let you go, I want to ask you how long do you think this Western support in this war will last?
I believe it depends on the US. US can end basically this war tomorrow. Let's say stop share intel, and Ukraine military is heavily dependent on US intel. Turn off Starlink, for example, and Ukraine military will be blind. Stop military support, stop everything. And without US, Europe can't fund this war for a long time, especially taking into consideration the state of economies of main European countries, first of all, Germany. We see this decline, we see political turmoil, we see the rise of far right ideas, because people are unhappy, because all those sanctions against Russia, they harmed German economy. That's why all this, many people in Germany nowadays, and anti-immigrant rhetoric, for example, yeah, there are many people many Germans who are not happy with Ukraine immigrants. They are not happy with the level of their integration into German society. They are not happy that there is a small percentage of Ukraine immigrants who took jobs. They are not happy that Ukraine immigrants are treated not equally with, for example, immigrants, refugees from Syria and Afghanistan, for example. So Ukraine refugees are privileged. So we have this racism here on the state level. Yeah, Ukraine immigrants, Ukraine refugees were portrayed as they were portrayed as Europeans, as us. They are like us.
I remember
Why
that article.
we, while we remember this long summer um, uh, of refugee crisis in 2015, when many Syrian refugees were portrayed as, barbarians, as savages, as threat because they are Muslims, as those who bring terrorism, as those who bring extremism to Europe. Ukraine refugees were not portrayed the same. They received many benefits, but at the same time, the number of Germans and other people, we already see those voices in Switzerland recently. Yeah, some Swiss politicians say, "Oh, those Ukrainians, they don't want to learn language, they don't want to integrate, they just demand, demand, and demand." Yeah, they don't. They so many people they express irritation because millions of Ukraine refugees receive these social benefits, and they believe it's not. But it's obvious, for example, from the Polish case, that Polish economy benefited heavily from Ukraine refugees. The Ukraine refugees paid more taxes than Polish government paid to Ukraine refugees to support them. And it's a win-win, for Polish economy and for Polish nationalists who don't want to accept Muslim refugees and Syrian refugees, and they say, "Oh, we have Ukrainians, we are full, we don't have any place, no room left."
But Polish and Ukrainian, they understand each other, yes? The language is quite similar.
Language, yeah, language barrier is one of the main obstacle. Yeah, language it's more easier for Ukrainians to learn Polish language, especially from people for people from Western Ukraine, for example. Yeah, because we have a lot of Polish words in our language because of the long tradition. Many for a long time Western Galicia, Volhynia belonged to Poland, and still so Surjik in Western Ukraine is, so this Ukrainian language is contaminated by many Polish words. Yeah, so it's easier to understand, and because of that, many of Ukrainians, they integrated very easily to the economy, and they occupy different jobs. And Poland made it's easier to use Ukraine, for example, diplomas, Ukraine educational certificates in Poland to occupy some jobs, high paid jobs, and jobs like, in the sector of education, for example, or in the medical sphere. That's why it's a different level of integration into the Polish society, into the Polish economy, than in Switzerland, for example, where we have, German speaking zone, Italian speaking zone, French speaking zone. It's not easy for Ukrainians to integrate. But because of this, the bottom line is, without US, Ukraine can't survive, basically, and can't continue this war. So so the math is very simple. No support, Ukraine has no weapon. no means to continue fighting.
Do you think the US is going to support Ukraine even now as it pivots to the east, to Middle East, and then to Asia? Because China is the main,
Yeah, the problem is that in the close surrounding, Trump surrounding, we have many voices who are against support of Ukraine. They are against support of Ukraine because they really believe that it's not a good way to spend money, and it's not a US problem. It should be left for Europe. They don't want. And because of the Middle East, and because of the rise of China economically, because of the Taiwan problem, for US, for many people in White House today, they want to concentrate on these problems, let's say, on the Middle East and on China, not on Ukraine. They want to make deal with Russia. And we see these, conversations, talks all the time. We see those meetings on the high level. So basically, Trump, the philosophy is very different from the philosophy of Biden administration. We know that they were that some contacts were preserved, but they were unofficial, let's say, between U.S. and Russia, and it was one of the main subjects of criticism of because they say you can't you should talk to people, yeah, you should have this dialogue because you should use diplomacy as well, not only threats, not only sanctions, not only some intimidation, but you should give a chance to diplomacy. That's why I believe that US is on the way of leaving this, on stepping down from this enterprise, the entire. And it's a very good lesson for other countries, for other small countries in Eastern Europe. So basically, today you have this friend, and this friend say, I will support you as long as you need. And tomorrow, this friend just change his mind and just say, oh, I have another priorities. It's a very good lesson for different countries, especially in Eastern Europe.
was
You
that
can't entirely rely and be dependent on others because you will be betrayed, because every single country is preoccupied by its own interest. It's a very good lesson for Ukraine and for other countries.
Henry Kissinger said that to oppose, to be the enemy of USA is dangerous, but to be its friend is suicidal.
Exactly. In Ukraine case, it proven to be true. In Ukrainian case, yes, because so many discussions were even during Biden administration with all this, performative support and all this stuff. Um, the military aid wasn't sufficient. It was still too little, too late. Some decisions by the administration was trying to influence every single military decision made on the highest level. And some decisions were, let's say, controversial. And we know all those investigations about this. Many experts in Ukraine say, oh, it's because of interference of US, the 30,000 of Russian troops were just allowed to leave Kherson without any damage. So they, because of this interference, because of this political decision, that's why when you completely rely on someone, depend on someone, it happens. You became be, you can be betrayed, especially if you are, a little country with little resources like Ukraine nowadays.
It's a good thing. I mean, uh, I am actually very surprised and very glad that you can preach these things in public. I know you have had an interview with my friend Glenn Deason, who is a
Yeah.
Norwegian professor. He has been taking so much, kicks in the face because of his stance. He
Yeah, I know. I know.
and what you said about small countries being betrayed by large countries, I think that is a crucial lesson that Norway should take to heart before an eventual conflict starts. Then that's why I'm kind of like doing this, because Norway has nothing to gain from a conflict with Russia. It has a lot of, it has a lot to lose.
Yes, exactly. And what is very also very important that you know um, it's easier to start war than to finish war. For example, on the both sides, Russian and Ukraine, we see very similar rhetoric about the losses. People in Ukraine say, why we should stop? So many people died for this cause, for independent Ukraine, for reestablishing, this sovereign state and so on and so forth. So how we can betray their memory? We should continue the same rhetoric we see on the Russian side, you know? And another idea, this revenge, constant revenge, attack, revenge. It could be never ending forever war until, Ukraine will be, just stop to exist, actually. So my point is we should end this war as soon as possible in order to preserve at least this territory and start to rebuild this and start to build peaceful life for people because millions of Ukraine don't want to return nowadays to Ukraine because they don't see the perspectives. What will happen in 1 year or two? Okay, now ceasefire. What next? Overnight, you will, like Ukraine government did actually, they closed the borders and people were without choice. I mean, first of all, men. And now they are forced to fight even if they don't believe in this in the entire cause. They don't believe that they should die for this. And when they see these corruption scandals every single day on the highest level, why I should die for this country? Many people ask themselves why my son should die and the son of this judge or this deputy member of parliament should be in Germany or in Great Britain or in US. So many, the aspect is very important in this war. This war showed, and in Russia as well, because when we see who were mobilized, in which regions, we see that those regions are poor regions, yeah? Because people want, for them, it's a big money. For them, it's a, survival means. Even if they, the logic is, even if I will die, my family will have some money. That's why many people from poor regions in Russia volunteer to the army and sign the contract because for them it's a social ladder. For them, it's a means to improve their financial situation and the situation of their family. In Ukraine, the corruption in the conscription system is enormous. Everyone knows in Ukraine how much you should pay if you are kidnapped by draft officers. $10,000, $50,000 just to be, just to have the possibility to leave this draft recruitment center. If you want to stay in this facility far from the front line, you pay more. So if you want to have exemption, you pay. And this system is it's an entire system, it's an entire economy of war nowadays in Ukraine, where most disadvantaged people are poor people. That's why when Ukrainian political elites and many members of political elites now are buying property in US, in Saudi Arabia, in Poland, working class people bury their sons. This is reality of the war, and this is another lesson that war is waged by, political elites, and they are main beneficiaries of this war. Those who produce weapons, those who hold political position, high political position, they are profiting from this war. While, disseminating this propaganda about, existential war and all this, all this stuff, patriotic stuff, yeah. So it's very painful question for many Ukrainians, because when you see nowadays who is sent to the front line, many of those people are working class people, are peasant people. Basically, they are poor people. Those who have money are drinking beers in the, cafes in Lviv, Kyiv, Odessa, and other cities, or they already left Ukraine, because there are many many schemes how you can leave Ukraine semi-legally or legally, even if you have money. So it's another lesson.
Hopefully, people will learn from it. I want to thank you for
Yeah.
your time.
Thank you
And
for the invitation. I hope that our listeners will be interested in our conversation. Yeah.
it was a wonderful conversation, and I hope we can do it again someday.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
very
I hope so.
knowledgeable.
Yeah. Okay, Vlad. So you plan to, I believe it's very long. You plan to cut it somehow, or you will
Oh yeah, it's
publish
just like two,
this?
2 hours, over 2 hours. Oh no, I don't know. I don't think I will cut it. Actually, no. I will think I will
Ah,
take it
no
in
worries. It's
entirety.
it's up to you. It's up to you. When you will publish, please send me a link. I will disseminate on my social media. Maybe we will, boost our audience.
Thank you very much again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vlad. Yeah, let's stay in touch. Have a nice day or evening. Yeah, evening, I believe. Yes. Yeah, okay. Great. Bye bye.